Um, so, gosh, I'll just say a couple things about who I am, and then open it up for questions. Talk about whatever you guys want to talk about. I mean, I think the reason you're all here is I worked on both of President Obama's campaigns. So I started on the first campaign just about the day he announced. He announced on February 10th, 2007, so I was right there, and it was a fascinating thing where it was almost like a startup. I mean, the campaign was just tiny at first. If you guys observe American politics, you'll remember that he was not supposed to win at all, and so it was a tiny team. There were fewer than 100 people when I started. When I started doing digital stuff, which is what what I've done ever since, and I'll talk about that. There were only 4 or 5 people working on that, and so. And obviously, to some degree, the internet itself was relatively new, and certainly Facebook and Twitter and all these things that we now talk about so much and that are now so integral to any kind of political campaign or any kind of social campaign were relatively new. I mean, I just said in the previous session, Facebook was about 1/10 the size it is today on Election Day 2008. The smartphone hadn't really been invented when we started to run, so the iPhone came out in the summer of 2007. When Senator Obama was already running, and so it was this fascinating experience in which the campaign was growing and going through this amazing political experience, the historic primary against Hillary Clinton and all of that, but at the same time that was all happening as the technology itself was changing and as the world was beginning to change in all these monumental ways. And so by 2012, when the Re-elect got going, I became the head of the digital strategy department. I had a group of about 250 people working on my team, doing everything that we did online: email, social media, video, online advertising, building websites and apps and platforms and all that. They were so relatively new in 2008. I mean, they had come to such a place of maturity by 2012. So, I said that Facebook was, in its relative infancy in 2008. Brady, you've already heard me say this, but in 2012, President Obama had 34 million Facebook fans. And what's more, those 34 million people were friends with 98% of the US-based Facebook population, which is almost the entire country and is in fact more than the number of people who vote. For us, I think for us, what all these transformations meant was, and I think I'll wrap up after this point and open it up for questions, is not just that there's all these new tools that you've got to learn and you've got to know this and that kind of algorithm and this and that, you got to understand how Facebook works and whatever you do, but also we thought the relationship that people have to politics and the role that politics and campaigns and government for that matter play in society has really changed. So. We used to say that if in 2008 we'd been, not local enough or not timely enough, or we hadn't done the right thing, or we hadn't put out content that was interesting, well, that wouldn't have been a great thing, and people might have clicked away. Obviously by 2012, people can click away and tweet about why they've lost confidence in the campaign, why they've lost confidence in the president. And so, it's a fundamental change to the power that ordinary people have, and forces the campaign to treat ordinary people in a whole different way, and treat them with a lot more respect. Put a lot more effort into, developing authentic relationships with them, genuinely engaging them, genuinely inspiring them, not only because they can do a lot of damage if you don't, but also because they can obviously do you a lot of good. So, we know that people don't, by and large trust politicians. They don't necessarily trust advertising, but they do trust what they hear from their friends. And so our whole task, particularly with respect to social media, was building up a core of people who, who could go out and be our messengers for us, with the understanding that they could do that a whole lot more credibly than we could. So I think I'll probably leave it at that for now and see what people actually want to hear about. Yes, ma'am. Oh, yes. Oh, thank you. I couldn't tell.
In the States, and I went on a man's phone and just sat there in one of these
Cool.
computer labs trying to convince people with a British accent to go out and vote.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm amazed they'd let someone with a British accent call voters. Yeah.
And one guy said, I voted, but can you just keep speaking? Two questions. In theory, you shouldn't be here because Obama's in so much trouble with the races coming up now in Senate. the campaign is over? And the second question is, given the amount of money that the Republicans are throwing at all these campaigns, where is the edge that a better digital campaign can have for you than for the Republicans?
Those are very good, big, complicated questions. I'll try to answer the. Yeah. No, I'll try to. I mean, I'll try to answer it as best I can. You know, I think clearly a flood of money from the Republican side is very damaging to us. Clearly, it would be foolish to claim otherwise. But it's equally clear, I think, that the Democrats continue to have the advantage when it comes to technology, the internet, social media, data, all that stuff. And so, you know, I think we are probably still in a time in which a flood of advertising money can probably overwhelm, you know, a lot of data smartness, and that'll be put to the test in 7 months. But I don't know how much longer that'll be the case. You know, I don't know how much longer it'll be the case that party can win elections by, you know, by virtue of an air war with absolutely no sophistication in terms of its messaging or targeting or data or any of that. So we shall see. But I think, you know, I think it's a fascinating question why there's such an advantage on the Democratic side with respect to the internet and technology and data and all that stuff. You know, especially because, you know, there was a lot of talk about that in the states in the past 16 months since the elections happened. And I actually know I know my counterparts on the Republican side, the people who ran Governor Romney's digital campaign, and they're perfectly smart. So it's, you know, it's not that they're not smart, and, you know, people say, well, maybe they couldn't recruit top talent, you know, and to me, it's a country of 300 million people. You know, if you can't find 100 or 200 people to join a campaign, you know, of course you can. You know, so to me, what's really interesting is there's such a philosophical difference about how politics ought to be practiced, and so it's, you know, you asked about the flood of money and ads. It's not just that they have that money; it's that they really believe that that's how campaigns should be practiced. They really believe that. You know, in my opinion, you know, I'm a partisan Democrat, so take it with a grain of salt. But they, you know, they really believe that, you know, the way you do win elections and should win elections is, you know, find somebody to, you know, give $100 million into a super PAC and spend that all on TV ads until there's really nothing that the other side can do about it. And obviously, they've, you know, very effectively convinced both the legislature and the Supreme Court to, you know, to enable that. And one of the things that you know, that I personally really admire about President Obama, but that I think, you know, in the era of President Obama has been ingrained into the Democratic Party is, you know, a genuine belief, not just a strategic belief that maybe this is how you can win, but a moral belief that this is how you should try to win. That, you know, you should try to, you know, elevate ordinary people and organize ordinary people and engage people in the process, you know, so that most people on our side don't really want a $100 million check to be spent on ads. We would probably take it if we could get it, and unfortunately we can't get it, so we have to do the best we can. But you know, the president is, you know, is so. I mean, you know, as I gather, you know, he was a community organizer in his youth, and that's what he did. And you know, his whole profession, his whole career was to, you know, was spent, you know, trying to forge connections between people, empower people, get them involved in their local community. And then, you know, along comes the internet 10 years later, and that's what the internet does, except, you know, at massive scale and instantaneously and electronically. And so I feel as if, you know, his values are so perfectly aligned with the values of this thing that kind of came up around him and now dominates to some degree the political process, but for the presence of TV ads. So I think it's a fascinating dynamic where you have not just a completely different set of strategies, but a completely different set of beliefs about how politics ought to work. And you know, and like I said, I think we are still in a time when you know, a flood of TV ads can you know, can crush a grassroots organization. But I wonder how much longer that'll be the case. As for me personally, and why I'm here and not there, trying to help us not get destroyed in the midterms, I'll just say. Two grueling presidential campaigns was enough for me, and so I'd rather be here. Yes, sir.
I'd like to just follow on a bit from that question about the differences between the two parties. Is there also something to do with the nature of the voters themselves? The Republicans and Democrats are more likely to be, you know, have their iPhones, post things on Facebook and sign petitions, and the Republicans will probably go to meetings and wave banners, and it's just a different way of acting in the community, shall we say?
I think there may be a little bit of truth in that, but I think there is probably not as much truth as one may think. I mean, internet penetration is approaching 100%, and and social media usage is. I forget the exact number. Something like 85% of internet users are social media users, and so, I understand the point that you're making. I absolutely think. To the extent that Democrats may attract a younger group of people, a more educated group of people to some degree, and a more technology-savvy group of people, that serves to our advantage. I also think within the constellation of Democratic politicians, President Obama is somebody who obviously attracted internet momentum in a way that others might not have been able to. But there are plenty of Republicans on the internet, plenty, and so that's why I really do believe. Going back to the previous point, that the reason that they have had less success, it has to do with a philosophy that doesn't particularly, and this is something that I probably wouldn't say domestically in the United States, but here we are in Brussels. I think that they are, not particularly concerned with the role of the individual in the political process, and so, our whole success was about getting other people to do things. We ourselves couldn't do all that much. All we could do was try to recruit people and motivate them and organize them, and then hope that they would do something, having been mobilized and motivated. So, we raised $690 million online. That required a whole lot of people being willing to respond when we asked. And so I think, if you're a Democratic grassroots, supporter, you've spent the last 6 years observing the political career of President Obama and hearing nothing but, this drumbeat of, it's all about the grassroots, it's all about organization, it's all about elevating the role of the individual in the political process. And so when we come out and say, and we'd like you to give $3, it doesn't feel like, why are they asking me this, or why should I care? I mean, they know exactly why we care, and I think on the other side, I think the grassroots is there, but at the elected official and party official level, they'd much rather deal with business leaders and big donors. And if you're taking $100 million checks from a guy named Sheldon Adelson, I don't know how much. It seems like there's a pretty savvy group here. Then why on earth is a person supposed to give $3 or spend a Saturday afternoon volunteering? So, again, I think there's a little bit of truth in what you're saying, but I also think, almost every Republican is on the internet, just as almost every Democrat is on the internet, and their party has a political philosophy that is inconsistent, I think, with a lot of grassroots success, because it's just not what they believe in right now. These things can change. I mean, look, the reality is, had we lost in 2008, we would very likely have had a presidential nominee on our side who didn't particularly care about this stuff either. Probably would have cared about it more than Mitt Romney, but less than Barack Obama. And so, these things can, this is not so much a partisan issue as others. It happens that we have in President Obama somebody who really cares about this stuff, and that's been great for the party. And I hope we're smart enough to elect someone in 2016 who cares, and I hope the people running in 2016 are smart enough to care, but these things can flip pretty quick. Sir.
So I work for the European Commission. I think they probably have a mentality that's closer to the Republicans than Democrats in terms of using social media. One of the things I hear a lot is that people are worried about controlling the messages that are passed through social media. So how do you mandate people to control the messages that are being passed on your behalf?
Well,
and they're also worried about the amount of work that generates in terms of monitoring the information that's being passed and controlling the messages and responding to them. How do you manage that amount of work?
I guess I think, whether a particular group of party officials or elected officials or whatever have embraced it or not, the world has already changed to the point that you can't control the message. So you can try to sort of like stand under an avalanche trying to keep the sand from, crashing down upon you, or you can do your best to, sort of go in the direction of, embrace or at least understand and acknowledge the ways in which this is already happening. And I know I don't mean to. I mean, it seems as if you get that, so I hope that doesn't come across as condescending. But I think it is funny because you do hear, that's something that we rarely talked about, on the campaign. And yet when I talk to big corporations or organizations where the culture is a little bit less sort of open to the internet, but not even the internet, just the way in which the whole world is changing and people are changing and all that. I always hear this concern about controlling the message, and the funny thing is, people are talking about you whether you like it or not, and maybe now you have newfound abilities to see that they're talking about you, but they were probably talking about you 10 years ago. They just didn't have Facebook. And so I think any organization, party, government, whatever, is in such a stronger position if instead of worrying about controlling the message, they're thinking about one, how can they arm their supporters with the most information and the most persuasive information they can, so that those people can at least sort of go infiltrate the conversation to the extent possible. Two, how can they have both a process but also resources and a strategy for responding to misinformation. So you can't convince people of stuff they don't want to be convinced of, but you can at least put the facts out there if the facts are favorable. And those are the things that I would be worried about, because controlling the message it isn't possible. But what you have, if you're not thinking about it in terms of, if one's not thinking about it in terms of message control, but is thinking there's these massive conversations happening all around the country, what you now have is the ability to be directly in touch with hundreds or thousands or millions of people who could go out and speak on your behalf and do so with a lot more credibility than than almost any elected official. And so making sure that they're saying the right things and or at least know what the facts are and feel inspired and motivated to go out and talk to people is probably a much better bet than trying to hang on to this notion of message control that's just that's just simply impossible right now, I think. Sir.
I'm interested in the read across to Europe. The kind of money you spend on election campaigns is just mind-boggling. Yeah. I'm running as a candidate in the European elections. I'm probably going to have less than £100,000 to spend. You're talking about staff of 240 just in your section. Mm-hmm. So what's the cheap and easy lessons to learn? And secondly, of course, for the first time, we kind of are having a presidential election in Europe, in the European elections, because the Lisbon Treaty says that the next president of the Commission should actually reflect the outcome of the elections, and all of the political parties have picked their candidates. So what would your message be to these people, but they also don't have any money?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I think I think the reality is that the core of the program that we ran and of the campaign that we ran was actually quite cheap and easy, and so probably 225 of those people were doing icing on the cake that that obviously provided some utility, but only because of the resource environment that we were working in. The absolute core of the program was a website, Facebook, Twitter, email, and that's it. I think those, there's a lot of talk about is Facebook on the decline and this and that kind of a thing. It's not on the decline that fast, and so certainly nothing is going to change too dramatically by May 25th. But I'd be surprised if things change too dramatically even by 2016. It's just there's too much stickiness in the way the internet works right now. So Facebook, Twitter, email, website. Facebook you can do for free. It helps to advertise, but you can do for free. Twitter, same deal. Email, you probably need to pay $100 a month to license a tool, and a website, it costs a little bit, but not a huge amount. And there's been so much attention paid, at least in terms of the domestic coverage of our campaign, to the analytics, the data, the technology, the science behind it, and that stuff was important. I'm not going to talk that stuff down, but the reality is we were much more concerned with the message, the content. Are we relating to people in an authentic way? Are we, is the tweet good? Is the Facebook message good? Is the video good? And so many of those people and so much of that money got put into this highly sophisticated means of targeting people individually and so forth that, again, was important, was probably not decisive in a 5 million vote victory by any stretch, and I would say was not nearly as important as, on a more human level, the fact that we were trying to put out good content, relate to people in an authentic way, have messages that resonated with people, have policies that would actually help people rather than hurt people, and that stuff is maybe not easy, but cheap. Yes.
Sorry, I have another question, sort of
That's
going
great.
back to my first one, which is, okay, it's great to mobilize people, and you obviously did that twice very successfully. But you look at Obamacare, and that was a digital fiasco, which may reflect or not. But how about when the mobilization's over and you are just trying to keep your base informed, proud of having voted Democrat, understanding Obama's point of view, which is being whittled away? Is that a different kind of campaign? Because you're not getting people to act, you're asking them to just be loyal, understand. Because that's what I'm missing here.
Totally. Look, I think, well, first of all, to the Obamacare, did you say fiasco or debacle? You said fiasco, right? Debacle also applies. Look, I mean, that was obviously an embarrassing ordeal, fiasco, debacle, that was of zero consequence in the long term, except for reputationally. So the deadline and so that matters, but I mean, the deadline for 2014 entry is March 31st, coming right up. All indications are that we're either going to, I'm not even with the administration, but that we, the Obama family, are either going to make the target or miss it by a slim margin, 100,000 or 200,000 or something like that. And even apart from the website, and I mean, clearly the website should have worked, but even apart from that, on the broader question of of this law and the political turmoil that's been surrounding this law for almost 6 grueling years at this point. Well, I mean, it's in some ways related to your original question. There's been such a flood of money and sort of grassroots mobilization against this law. The more people who experience it, the more people like it, and it's one of these issues where familiarity with the issue is highly correlated to support for the law, not not anything other than that. To the question you're asking about. About how do you actually govern? I mean, that's sort of what you're talking about. That's a tricky problem that we have not solved, and it's easy to as someone who did not go work in the administration, it's easy to take pot shots at what they did and didn't do, and why they may not have been more effective at keeping support up in between the election cycles. But I don't want to pretend to know. I think I do think there's a couple of lessons. I think first of all, people get people clearly. Is everything okay? I think clearly, we have a political system in America. We have a political system in America that was, that I think is unfortunately ill-suited to the communications environment of our times. We happen to have a weak executive. I don't mean President Obama. I mean constitutionally we have a weak executive, but we have a media that obsesses over the presidency because it's one person and it's exciting and it's glorified. And so that's an intrinsic problem that really nobody has ever solved. I mean, we haven't had a president leave office with any popularity to speak of except for Bill Clinton. And I think everybody remembers why he left office with popularity. In the modern era at all. And so anyway, I mean, I could go on about our political system, but I'm sure you know. I think it's a really tricky problem. I think I think governing is it's clear. Mario Cuomo, Andrew Cuomo's father, famously said, "You campaign in poetry and you govern in prose." It's less exciting. There's so much more complexity to the challenge. You're not just trying to get people excited and point them at one action in one day. You're trying to grapple with foreign affairs and legislative complexity and all of that. And it's absolutely the case that within that environment we haven't figured out how to keep people excited. Failed in a major way in 2010, and that's the reason we have a terribly adverse climate in Congress. And all I can say is I hope we get better at that. Because you are correct. I also think it's to some degree it's a question of resources. One of the things some of you guys work in government, or all of you sort of work around government. It seems. government's a big bureaucracy, and so the digital team in the White House is about 12 people, and so and they're trying to do not just mobilization and communications, but also open government initiatives, open data initiatives, and so there is no amount of brilliance that 12 people could have within a 3 million person federal structure that would dramatically transform the nature of citizenship. And so one of the things I really hope for from whether it's the next 2 years of this administration or the subsequent administration is, a real investment, because you just can't, any kind of bureaucracy is a question of resources and budgeting. You wish it were more about brilliance and brilliant ideas, and it's about that too, but it's also about resources and budgeting and structure and, whether people have a seat at the table and stuff like that. And that's been a major challenge. Yes?
I'm not Louise.
Hello.
Okay, hi. I'm non-political and I'm not working for the Commission. I work for a tyre company. We've been hearing a lot about authentic messaging, and I was wondering if you could give us a few top tips for what you think made the authentic messaging work so well.
Sure. Let me give you some examples. What's a good example? Okay. Do folks happen to remember when Clint Eastwood spoke at the Republican convention? Okay, so everybody remembers this. So if anybody doesn't, so it was this ridiculous piece of performance art where Clint Eastwood barks at an empty chair at the Republican convention in front of about 30 million people watching on TV, as if the president were sitting in this empty chair, and so he's sort of yelling at this faux president. Among other things, that night we put out a tweet and a Facebook message that said, "This seat's taken," and it showed a picture of the president actually sitting in a chair. And it became our most retweeted tweet of all time, 65,000 retweets. It was our most retweeted tweet until election night, when we had what was the most retweeted tweet of all time until the Oscars, when Ellen overtook us, which I'm not happy about. This is probably a better example if you can actually see the tweet and visualize what I'm talking about. But I think what I think is a good example about it is, 8 years earlier, probably even 4 years earlier, had that event occurred with Eastwood, we would have put out a statement from the campaign manager saying, we're awfully disappointed in what we've seen tonight from Clint Eastwood, or whatever. And everybody from the campaign would have gone home and gone to bed and said, well, we did our job, we responded, it's okay. But the 10 or 15 million Obama supporters who were watching that night, who had seen the guy they fight for, donate to, volunteer for, get publicly mocked, would have gone to bed, I think, feeling a little bummed, because that statement would have been for the press. Maybe it shows up in the New York Times the next day, maybe it gets read aloud on CNN, but it's not really for the supporters. And it's a politically crafted statement, designed to seem above it all and above the fray, rather than, a direct-to-consumer message that says, hey, we're not going to take this, we're going to fight back. And so, I think that's just one example, obviously, but I think it's a really illustrative one in terms of, what it means to try to actually talk to people rather than talk through the press to, or engage in a political dialogue rather than addressing the emotions of actual people. But we were really quite obsessed with authentic messaging. It can mean a lot of things. Part of it was just on a human level, making sure that people see the president. Here, let me actually start this sentence again. In 2008, we had the challenge of taking this guy who people really liked and related to and thought was a nice guy and a family guy, and trying to make them able to picture him as president. And so we did so many events with American flags in the backdrop, always had him wearing a tie, a young guy, you got to sort of make people see him as a potential president. In 2012, we almost had the opposite challenge, where it had now been 4 years that they've been seeing him as president, and the risk was that they'd lost sight of what a nice, likable, inspiring guy he was. And so, obviously he still does events with American flags behind him, but we did a lot more, he would drop by bars, and have a beer with someone, or drop by a diner and chat with people, or, go to a sporting event or things like that. And then certainly in terms of our online communications, we felt like, you see him every day on television being formal, giving a speech, dealing with world leaders. So the particular value add and the particular role of, the email you might get from him or his tweets was, to show him, we always felt like an email that he's sending out to his email list of however many millions of people should sound like what you would imagine he sends to his best friend if he's really annoyed about something. So, the opposite of speechifying language, Imagine Barack Obama, the man, is upset about healthcare or upset about what Romney just said or whatever, and write it that way. And so not very famously, but somewhat famously, we would use the subject line "Hey," from the president, and not a message from President Obama or whatever, and stuff like that. And then that's about Barack Obama the person. Even when it came to communicating around policies and things like that, we found, we felt on a human level, but also found quantitatively when we tested, that taglines, rhetoric, advertising, this stuff is just of decreasing currency in the current environment. I mean, this is something that I find really striking to think about. Someone who's going to vote for the first time in 2016, a person who will be of voting age for the first time in 2016 will have been 6 when Facebook was created. 6. So, many of you guys probably remember when there were 2 or 3 television stations and you couldn't fast forward commercials, and an increasing share of the population not only doesn't remember those days, never lived through those days, and never will. Their entire life experience is about, being able to read what they want, watch what they want, look at what their friends are sharing with them, rather than what some brand or politician or advertiser or whatever is trying to force upon them. And so that means you've got to be interesting. Like challenge number, I think the table stakes. It used to be that table stakes were to be on message, and now I feel like table stakes are to be interesting, because you're dealing with a lot of people who have no reason to be watching what you're trying to show them or reading what you're trying to show them. They could be doing anything. And you're not competing for their attention with Mitt Romney. You're competing for their attention with their friends, whatever viral video, music video, their email from their mom, whatever. And so that puts a pretty heavy burden on just being interesting. And so we had a lot of different ways of trying to be interesting, but I think that's a very different mindset, because I think political communication historically is about being on message, about being tight and scripted and not saying anything wrong. And you still have to do that stuff, but now there's this newfound burden of being really interesting, appealing to people who could be doing anything else in the world, thanks to the way the internet works, other than watching your video or reading your tweet. And so we put a lot of thought into that. Yes?
Okay. Hi. I'm actually a few months ago we have started a mini campaign because we have a problem. I'm Ukrainian, and we have a problem with the Russian disinformation and the wars that we are having. So what you have heard maybe. So our problem is as following. So we don't have the state-supported media, abroad. We don't have a very concrete media platform or campaign. So what we have is mailing lists, conferences, newsletters, personal connections that we're trying to communicate. What the Russians have, they have so they have post-Soviet Union systems of communication, ITARTAS and others. Russia Today, for example, in London. So they are covering this area. And secondly, they have also like BBC and CNN and all the journals which are sitting in Moscow and oftenly simply translating the information into English. And this is what gets around the world. So these are our main challenges, and where would you start and how would you deal with them?
Yeah. Well, I get that question all the time. Just kidding. Look, I mean, that's a big problem, obviously. I'm of the view that over the long term, almost all totalitarian regimes are fighting a losing battle. I mean, I think that's relatively clear. That's probably not that helpful to you in the short term. If you're dealing with a situation in which the internet, access to the internet is actually blocked, or language used on the internet is censored, then that's obviously a very tragic situation, and one that that I have not personally faced, and other than international pressure, I'm not sure what would address that. If you're dealing with a situation in which you do have the freedom to communicate and organize, I would almost answer it in the same way I answered the gentleman who hopefully will be winning his European Commission election soon. Look at how the Arab Spring got started. Not to oversimplify what was obviously a very complex and long-term process, but one of the catalyzing events for that whole thing was a Facebook group. I mean, with no money, no particular organization besides something that really struck a chord at the appropriate moment. Email listservs, again, are relatively free and easy to build, and the same goes for a couple of these other platforms. Now, how you solve the problem of Vladimir Putin, I do not know, or I cannot answer in a couple of seconds. But I do know, I do really believe that except in the event that access to the internet is blocked or free speech is censored, there are no better tools to use than these. No better tools have existed in all human history, I think, than these, and this is what they're for. I mean, they're for giving people a voice and giving people a way to communicate, that never existed. I mean, really through all recorded human history until about 10 years ago. So I don't know how helpful that is in terms of tactics, but but that is my view about the broader situation. Oh, yeah. Say the name again? Mr. Ford. I was saying in the earlier meeting that I said to you Facebook, email, Twitter, and website. Thank you. I don't remember what I said. I came in on a red eye last night, by the way, from New York. But email, email gets very little love, and actually this would apply to you as well. Email gets very little, I think, respect, just because it's annoying. You get work emails, and people don't necessarily love dealing with it, and it's not new in the way that social media is. So it feels a lot sexier, I think, to talk about social media. Email is unbelievably powerful, way more, in my opinion, than Facebook and Twitter. I mean, if I had to give up one or the other on the campaign, I mean, that wouldn't have been a great choice, but I'd have taken email over Facebook and Twitter without a second thought, because email, Facebook and Twitter are great for getting a message out there. Email is great for getting people to actually do something. And that's not just my view. I mean, I've got lots of data to back that up. We raised 20 times more money via email than we did via social, recruited probably 50 times more volunteers via email than via social. And if we needed people to, do something, show up somewhere, that was largely done via email, whereas if we wanted to get a message out there, that was done via social. So I would just urge anyone who's trying to organize people, motivate people, mobilize people, not to give short shrift to email, annoying though it may be. It's an incredibly powerful channel, and I would say still, I don't know if this will be the case in 10 years, but still more powerful than social.